I think one of the biggest hurdles that new riders have to overcome is getting used to using both hands and both feet independently to ride a motorcycle. On a motorcycle, both hands and both feet have separate jobs to do. It's the coordination of those controls that allows us to navigate on a motorcycle. So far in our control series here on MCrider, we've talked about the clutch controlled by the left hand, the throttle and the front brake controlled by the right hand. It gets double duty, and the rear brake controlled by the right foot. So this week I thought we'd talk about the job of the left foot, and we'll talk about the shifter. The way the transmission works on a motorcycle is different than that on a standard transmission car. On a car, I can shift directly from second gear to fourth gear, so I could potentially choose to totally skip a gear if I want to. On a motorcycle, though, the transmission shifts sequentially through each gear. Each click up goes up one gear, each click down goes down a gear, with the exception of neutral. Neutral lives 1/2 click up from first gear or 1/2 click down from second gear. One of the rider's jobs is to keep the motorcycle in the proper gear for the current road speed. That brings up the question, well, what is the proper gear to be in a motorcycle? Well, part of that depends on the motorcycle. My Rocket 3 has tons of torque. I could literally put that bike in third gear and I could ride at highway speeds all the way down to speeds on city streets just using one gear. I've had other bikes that did not have as much torque, and they were much more sensitive to keeping them in that sweet spot of the rev range. The sweet spot for most motorcycles is, this is a pretty rough estimate, 3,000 to 4,500 RPM. Again, this is going to vary greatly depending on the motorcycle that you're riding, because sport bikes like to be ridden higher in the rev range, and they typically have a much higher rev range than, say, a cruiser that keeps its RPMs low, and it uses the torque of the engine to power through. All of this leads to different bikes for different purposes, and it all provides for a different riding experience. Now, motorcycles are pretty cool. Finding the proper gear to be in comes with experience, and it will change depending on the motorcycle that you're riding. Another thing that new riders struggle with is finding neutral on the motorcycle. In fact, that's one of the first things that's taught in a new rider class is finding neutral. If you want to put the motorcycle in neutral and you're not sure what gear you're in, just squeeze the clutch and click down several times until you're sure the motorcycle has reached first gear. And then that trick is getting that half click up to find neutral. It does take some finesse to get proficient at finding neutral, but if you do click up and go all the way into second gear, remember you can do a half click down by tapping on that shifter to find neutral from second gear as well. Some bikes are more difficult than others to find neutral, but often rocking a motorcycle forwards and backwards is going to really help the motorcycle to get into neutral, especially those ones that are more difficult to find neutral in. And while we're on the subject of neutral, I want to emphasize that neutral is not a gear. And the entire time that motorcycle is being ridden on the street, the motorcycle should be in the proper gear for the road speed. Stopped at a stoplight, the proper gear for that road speed is first gear, not neutral, because neutral is not a gear. So all of you riders who pull up to the stoplight and you shift to neutral as soon as you stop are putting yourself at the mercy of all the cars around you, hoping that they'll stop and not hit you from behind. Now, I don't have as big a problem if you're stopped for a long light or you're stopped for a train or something like that, and you've got at least two cars stopped behind you to give you some protection. I often shift into neutral in those situations. But as a general practice, you're asking for trouble if you're shifting into neutral all the time. You just have to build up those clutch muscles, and keeping that clutch squeezed at a light is not really that big of an issue once your hand gets used to manipulating the clutch. One of the more popular videos on MCrider was the discussion about preloading the shifter. Many motorcycles shift pretty roughly, especially from the lower gears. And one way that can be compensated for is called preloading the shifter. All that means is if you're shifting from first to second gear, you're getting your foot under the shifter and you're putting a little bit of pressure under that shift lever. It's not nearly enough pressure to force it to change gears, but just a little bit of pressure on it. Then when you roll off the throttle and squeeze in the clutch, that transmission is just going to feel like it jumps up into the next gear. It takes a little bit of trial and error to get used to the feel of it, but if your motorcycle shifts roughly, this is a good way to smooth it out. Now, right now I've got 3 motorcycles. All of them have different techniques when it comes to shifting. My gold wing back there is a DCT, so I can put it in drive and the motorcycle will shift up and down through the gears as it needs to. I've also added a foot shifter on that motorcycle so that I can get a more traditional shift on it and not have to use the paddles. I can shift the traditional way, either taking over shifting altogether in manual mode or override the decisions of the DCT. My Rocket 3 has a traditional motorcycle transmission with the addition of a speed shifter. And a speed shifter allows for clutchless gear changes up and down through the gear range once the motorcycle's in motion. And it makes shifting really quick, and it's fun to click up and down through the gears to get that motorcycle ready for a corner. So if I'm approaching a corner, I can just click down a couple of gears. I don't have to mess with the clutch at all, and that bike sounds really good when I do that. Also got a Triumph Speedmaster, and it's got a more traditional transmission. No fancy DCT, no speed shifter, just the standard traditional motorcycle. And I enjoy riding all 3 motorcycles, but each one has its own nuances. They each like different shift points. They each have a different feel when shifting up and down through the gears, or in the case of the Gold Wing, just let the motorcycle handle all of that part of the riding if I choose to. I think getting good with the shifter is one of those skills that's developed with time and experience. Now, I've given a few tips in this video about making your shifting experience better, but ultimately your shifting improves the more you ride and the more you get familiar with your motorcycle. Like I said earlier, every motorcycle is different. Every brand of motorcycle will have a different feel when it comes to shifting. And if you ride a variety of motorcycles, some transmissions will stand out over others for you. I do have to say this, though. My 2 Triumphs have 2 of the best transmissions I've had on any motorcycle. They're silky smooth, they're positive feedback, so I get a positive click up and down when I'm going up and down through the gears. It's never been a problem on the Triumphs to find neutral. Really solid transmission on those bikes, and it's really enjoyable. Also, like the Yamaha XSR, had a really good transmission on it, and the shifting on it was really positive as well. So I hope you found this video helpful, and until next week, guys, it's Kevin with MCrider, and I'll see you on the road.